My name is Xavier Adams. I'm a social studies teacher at Orange High School in Hillsborough, North Carolina, where I teach AP African American Studies, Honors Latin American Studies, and World History. As we join this conversation together today, I'm bringing y'all along with me and my students as well and teachers across the state for this important conversation that we'll be having with our two candidates today. In a brief moment, I'm gonna have y'all get up and move around. I'm missing my classroom this morning, so I'm gonna have y'all do some exercises on behalf of my students. Before we do that though, what I would also do with my students, I'm gonna ask y'all to do, please make sure your phones are silent. So take a second to silence your phones. Let's be present with this conversation. And so we're gonna go ahead and get started. I'm gonna introduce our candidates, and then again, I'm gonna have y'all do an activity for me. So we are joined today by Michelle Morrow, who is the Republican candidate for State Superintendent of Public Instruction. Michelle earned a Bachelor's of Nursing from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and some of her work experience includes being a homeschool teacher, a missionary, and also a nurse. Let's give it up for Michelle. We are also joined today by Maurice Green, who is the Democrat candidate for State Superintendent of Public Instruction. Maurice earned a Bachelor's of Political Science and Economics from Duke University, as well as a JD from Duke University. Some of his previous work experience includes being a lawyer, a district superintendent, as well as a executive director of the Z. Smith Reynolds Foundation. Let's give it up for Mo, please. If elected, when elected, North Carolina superintendent will have some important roles that they will be playing. And so I just want us as the audience to be aware of what the state superintendent actually has responsibilities over. Perhaps most importantly, they will have the direction of North Carolina's Department of Public Instruction. Within the Public of Instruction, they have a $17.2 billion budget that they will be overseeing for education-related matters across the state. Additionally, they will be working with 1,014 employees, 139 contractors, and 651 temporary employees. Perhaps most important, though, is the fact that they will be working with our 115 school districts across the state, which includes 2,500 schools and more. These schools ranging from public schools, charter schools, a couple of regional schools, and 3 schools that serve the deaf and hard of hearing. Ground rules for today's discussion: each candidate will be given 2 minutes to respond to each question that I pose to them. Because this is not a debate format, there will not be a formal time for a rebuttal. However, candidates in their responses may choose to use those 2 minutes how they choose, and so if they choose to use that time for a rebuttal, they may do so. Candidates, on behalf of the audience, I ask that you do primarily stick to your plans, offer us the vision that you're planning to do with education. You may use that time for rebuttals, but we'd love to hear your plans that you have for us. With that, as Elaine mentioned, there's a Q&A portion that will be taking place after my conversation with these candidates. You may use the app Slido to submit your questions, and you may upvote questions that you find to be interesting. So, I would like for us to now introduce ourselves to our candidates. So in a second here, I'm gonna give us some prompts. If these prompts apply to you, please stand up and remain standing. That first prompt is, please stand up if you are a parent of a child in North Carolina's public schools. Remain standing for me. Please stand up if you currently work with students who are enrolled with K-12 public schools in our state. Please stand up if you were educated in North Carolina public schools. And for everyone else, there's this last prompt for y'all, and I'm really trusting that y'all are gonna do what I say. So, for everyone, if you love public schools, please stand up and make some noise for our public schools. All right, remain standing for me. Remain standing, remain standing. Y'all are doing great as students. So for this last prompt, I'd like for us to take a second, think back to your educational experience. Kindergarten, being young, perhaps being sad, leaving the house, leaving your parents behind. Entering middle school, awkward stages, maybe some pimples along the way. High school, you're feeling yourself, you're starting to get that driver's license, excited to go to the prom. Thinking back on your experience, I'd like for you to sit down if your identity, whether your race, gender identity, sexual orientation, became a barrier to the education that you received. And the rest of y'all may now sit down. Thank you. Part of this exercise that I'm hoping to show is that our relationships with public schools can be complicated and nuanced. We can both really appreciate the work that public schools are doing across the state, and we can also recognize that there's perhaps more that we're wanting out of them. Perhaps we're dreaming of more opportunities for ourselves, our younger selves, when we think back to that experience, or perhaps we're thinking about the future generations and the current generations that are in our public schools. So thank you for taking a moment to introduce yourselves to the candidates. I'm going to now turn it over to them to introduce themselves to you. So with that, I'm going to ask for each of y'all to give 5 I am statements to the audience. Very quick I am statements, yo soy oraciones, about yourselves, however you choose to identify yourself. So Michelle, we'll start with you. Give us 5 I am statements, please.
Okay. Thank you so much, by the way, for having this and for the invitation. Yo soy una mujer, una cristiana, una madre, una enfermera, y una enseñadora.
Great, thank you. Maurice?
Great, and good morning to everybody, and thanks so much for having me here. And you can call me Mo. You don't have to call me Maurice. And so I am blessed to be a husband, a father, a lawyer, a former school district superintendent, and a sports fan.
So, now that we know a little bit about you, we'd really like to know, you are running for state superintendent, the both of you. What motivates you personally to run for state superintendent, and in particular, why now in this moment?
I'm running for State Superintendent of Public Instruction because I believe that education is the great opportunity maker. I think that it is our responsibility to ensure that the next generation is going to be able to fulfill their goals and their dreams. It's important that we recognize education and the direction of our school system really determines the direction of our state in the future. We all would agree that a sound education is what lifts families and entire communities out of poverty. It's what's going to develop the next level of leaders that we need to ensure that North Carolina and our nation is able to compete in the global marketplace that we find ourselves in. I'm running because I believe that after 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, 9 months out of the year, for 13 years, our students should be equipped and ready to dive into their future, whether that means enrolling in university, enlisting in the military, or being employed in a job that's not only going to be financially rewarding, it's also going to be personally rewarding. And I think that we can do that in North Carolina. There was a time in our history when North Carolina was one of the greatest places to get a public education, and many of us probably experienced that when we were young. It's now time for us to get back on track and to ensure that North Carolina education is leading the charge, and we will be the best public school system in the nation and an example for everyone else to follow.
Thank you. Mo?
Thank you. So I'm running because I believe that the very soul of public education is on the ballot this November. If you think about where we find ourselves in North Carolina, we are spiraling downwards in a number of ways. Think about funding of our public schools, for example, where we find ourselves in 48th position compared to the rest of the nation. When you think about the effort that our state puts into public education funding compared to the rest of the nation, we're 49th. If you compare us to other states and the nation on a per pupil basis with regards to funding, you see it even more clearly. Nationally, about $16,000 per pupil. Virginia is at about $14,000. South Carolina is at about $15,000. We are at about $11,000 per student. I'm deeply concerned about the lack of respect shown to our public school system and to our educators. We ought to be revering our educators, and yet we find ourselves in a place where that's not happening. Even my opponent, let's just break it on down, it's called our public school educators groomers, and she's aligned with a colleague who calls our educators wicked people, calls our public schools cesspools of evil, lies, and deception. You see, we must get to a place where we can indeed focus on student achievement, because that's also a reason that I'm running. And to do that, I do have a vision of how we can move our state forward in a way that will actually allow each of our kids to be the exceptional people that they are destined to be.
Thank you, Mel. I forgot to give y'all this heads up. We have a short timer there.
I see that.
Thank you. According to Carolina Population Center, the Latine population is projected to be about 1.4 million people in North Carolina. It's the fastest growing population across our state. With that in mind, given this increasing presence and the role that the Latine population will play in our state, what's your vision for North Carolina's public education system? And in particular, how does your vision address the needs of bilingual and Latine learners?
Thank you. My husband and I were missionaries in Mexico City for 4 years, and actually 3 of my 5 children were born in Mexico. And I have an absolute heart for everybody south of our border and for the Latin culture. I will tell you that we are failing to provide all of our students the quality education that they need, and one of the things that we must focus on is English learning. When I am superintendent, I will ensure that no one leaves elementary school without mastering reading, writing, and math, because those are the foundational principles upon which all higher levels of education are learning. And I would even support to you that all of our instructors, all of our teachers moving forward, because we have such a growing population of diversity and of languages, not just Spanish. We have people coming from all over the world, specifically to North Carolina. It's important that our children are understanding English, but it's also important that we serve the parents, because we all know that if we can strengthen that parent and teacher connection, if we can engage those parents into their child's learning experience, our children are going to reach higher levels of achievement. And so what we're really wanting to do, I would like our schools specifically to be open during the evening time to work with communities to allow parents to be taking English classes, to allow parents to have an opportunity so that they can even improve their education opportunities and also their work opportunities. Because we all know that when you speak English and when you have mastered the English language here in the United States, everyone's ability to earn more and to reach your full potential is increased. So I want to make sure that our students get the sound basic knowledge that they need, but also our teachers. With this increasing diversity, our teachers should all be trained in ESL. Our teachers should all be trained in EC, in handling our EC students. And that's what we need to do at the university level. And as an advocate, I will be working with those committees in the General Assembly to do so.
Thank you. Maurice?
Great. So the vision that I would offer is the vision that we utilized when I was superintendent of Guilford County Schools for 7.5 years. It's a vision that calls on a quote from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Intelligence plus character, that is the goal of true education, and to combine it with a focus on excellence, being the best. That is, again, what we used in GCS as we moved from having the most low-performing schools in the entire state under the old accountability metrics to one where those same schools were no longer considered low-performing under that old accountability metrics. And at the same time, increased our graduation rates to remarkable levels, also increasing the number of students taking and passing college-level courses while still in high school, and being recognized as a national district of character. And so then how does it relate to the conversation we're having this morning? I would lift up a number of things. One, we absolutely must be sure that each child get what they need to be successful. And so that will certainly mean that we have to provide the kind of differentiated resources and additional resources for kids to get that. English as a second language instruction, as an example. Something we did in Guilford County School that might be something that we take across the state would be newcomer schools, where folks who are new to North Carolina may have had their educational opportunities interrupted. Here's a way to start in a safe environment and then go from there. Now, I need to be abundantly clear. My opponent talks a good game. But my opponent, if you look at the video that she put herself on, was making intolerant remarks about people who did not speak English as a first language.
I'd like to ask a follow-up question for the two of you. Michelle, one is related particularly to what you said, and I'm going to also offer y'all both another question as well. So that first follow-up question is, you talked about wanting to open up schools after hours to be able to invite parents in from the community.
Right.
I'm wondering who would be staffing that, where would the funds be coming for that to be able to ensure that that idea would be working?
Yes, that would absolutely, thank you for the question. There are right now many churches and other groups that are teaching ESL to people in our communities. We must reach out to our communities and to all of the programs to be able to do that. But I would say also that if there are teachers that wanted to have extra money, they could do that a couple of nights a week. But this is I want to address something here. We live in a society right now where people are taking things out of context. You are completely misrepresenting, and we have an anxiety, we have a depression, we have an issue in our schools because of this fact. I will tell you something. I believe every person is created in God's image, but I believe that the laws of this land must be obeyed. And I believe that laws must be obeyed in our schools as well. And while my opponent would like to tell you that I am dangerous, I'll tell you, he just talked about being the executive director for Z. Smith Reynolds. You must need to know this, ladies and gentlemen, that while he was the director of this far-left extremist group, they helped to fund the Antifa riots. They helped to fund the Antifa riots of 2020. They also helped to defund police. I want you to know, the NCAE, yes, they're supporting him. The NCAE has been calling for the removal of student resource officers from our schools.
I'm going to give a 10-second heads up.
In a time when we have increase in drugs, violence, assaults. Last year, almost 1,500 teachers were assaulted on the job. So we have got to get discipline and character back into our classroom, and we need to make sure that our staff and our students are safe. And I am the one who has a school safety advisory council, which he called a false narrative and not necessary.
So the question I would like to pose to both of y'all now, and I appreciate the follow-up that you're offering.
Sure.
What role do you think Spanish and identity plays within our classrooms? I kind of heard us both talking about ESL, and I think sometimes as a classroom teacher, we see ESL play out where students perhaps are forced to lose their identity. And so I'm wondering, where do you see Spanish and identity playing a role in our education system? And I'm going to toss it over to Mo, and then I'll come to you.
Okay.
So I absolutely believe that we should be elevating Spanish as part of the educational opportunities that all students get the opportunity to get in our schools. If you think about it, we ought to be leaning into our identities. Our diversity in this country ought to be celebrated. And so that should mean that we should have dual language opportunities, that when students arrive in our schools, that they feel welcome with whatever language they may happen to speak, and that we find ways to continue to elevate and support that language acquisition as we also support them learning English as well. And then identity goes deeper than that. It's certainly about being sure that folks understand and appreciate one's history, that it is taught in a way that is
Exactly right.
respectful of all. And so that's what I would say on that regard. And folks, I want to spend just a moment because my opponent wants to lift up the Z. Smith Reynolds Foundation. Many of you in this room will understand the magnificent organization that ZSR is.
Oh, do you?
And all of the wonderful things that ZSR has done for every person in this state, particularly marginalized communities. This is the organization that recognizes the importance of folks like the Latinx community and celebrates it as often as it can. This question about
Thank you.
ZSR we'll explore a little bit more, but I want us to fully understand that's not a place to go.
Thank you. Would you like for me to repeat the question?
Sure.
Okay, so the question was, I heard both of y'all talking about ESL, and sometimes in these ESL contexts, we see that students are sometimes not welcome to bring their experiences, their identities into the classroom. Sometimes there's a loss of their first language. As you pointed out, ESL isn't just for Spanish speakers, it's also for other languages that people bring into the classroom with them. And so I'm wondering, what role do you think people's first language plays in their education as well as their identity?
Well, you know, the first language is always the heart language, right? I mean, that's how you best express yourself, and it's really, I mean, it's how you dream, literally, when you're sleeping. And so we definitely want to encourage our students that come from around the world to be able to have that, because you know what, as they go into adulthood, if they keep that language, back when immigrants used to come, maybe your grandparents or your great-grandparents, they used to say, don't speak, you know, our native tongue, you have to speak English because that's what you're going to need. And then the children and grandchildren were upset because they couldn't even communicate with many of their elders and people that were their ancestors. And so I absolutely want to respect that and I want to uphold that. But I do think that when we look at the school system, it is very important that English be the basis, that we help them to get that sound basic education in that regard, because we cannot, right now, and you guys all know this, I've traveled around the state of North Carolina for the last 3 years, and I've talked to families, I've talked to parents, I've talked to teachers and administrators, and they're all saying the same thing. The teachers are being expected to do so much more than was expected 30 years ago. Now we have students that don't speak English, kids with behavioral and developmental issues, as well as typical learners, as well as gifted and talented students, all in the same classroom. And when you put on the administrative burdens and you put on everything that you're doing that is not specific classroom instruction time, we aren't actually enhancing our academic experience, and it's really hindering us from being able to make bilingual students because there's all of these other things that are tried to be shoved into that school day. So I will say this, I will say that I believe that our education system should be focused on finding inside of each and every student, what is your gifting? What is your talent? What is your passion? And I think by the time they're in 7th or 8th grade, we should be giving them pathways for them to be successful and to be able to reach their highest potential. And this is a statistic. Only 38% of our students right now that are graduating high school are actually going on to a 4-year degree. We've got to do something for that 62% and increase our CTE trainings. Yes, thank you.
I want to ask a quick yes or no question, which I realize is not fair, so I'll try and make it as fair of a question as possible, but I want to also get on to other questions. Mo, I'll start with you. Michelle, I'll come to you second.
Sure.
Would you support paying bilingual teachers and people working in a public education system additional funds for being able to speak Spanish? Mo, we'll start with you.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. So I started my career in the pandemic. I remember when we were logged into Zoom, had to look at my students through the screen, right? Some would log in, some unfortunately didn't log in for various reasons of what might have been going on at home. Perhaps they were working. During this time, we saw that public education was highly revered. People recognized how difficult it was to actually educate their kids when that burden became more of their responsibility at home. In the last 2 years, though, we've kind of seen a decline in the respect for public education. And so I'm wondering, in your role as state superintendent, how would you address this skepticism, and particularly, how would you build trust in the North Carolina community in public instruction?
Do I go first? Sorry.
Yes, sorry.
Okay. For the last 5 years, I actually have been working as an advocate for the people of North Carolina, and I have been fighting for the parental rights bill so that parents can know what's going on in their schools. I've been fighting to get boys out of girls' sports. I've been fighting to protect our children medically. As a nurse, it is very concerning to me that we are training our children and teaching them that puberty is something that should be blocked or it should be redirected. I think that what we need to be focusing on in our classrooms is helping our students to learn how to think, to be critical thinkers, to be problem solvers, to understand how to resolve conflict in a healthy way, to have those civil dialogues, to teach them rhetoric and debate. It's so important because we are not raising children, we're actually raising adults. And they are going to be able, they have to be able to be successful into their adulthood. And we all know as adults, there is nothing but conflict and difficulties and problems that have to be resolved. So what I would be doing is I will focus our classroom time, and I think if we will get back, we need to recognize something. As much as we want to say, oh, it's so great that we constantly celebrate this or celebrate that, we cannot celebrate the fact that across the state of North Carolina, less than 20% of our Hispanic or Black students are at grade level in reading or math. Ladies and gentlemen, we just keep pushing people along from year to year to year, and we are not preparing them, and they are not able to compete. And what we need to be doing is ensuring that they have that sound education. That is the whole goal. The whole goal of public schools needs to be student-centered. This is not about protecting a system. This is not about just saying that everything is great. There is a reason why teachers are fleeing and families are desperate to get their kids out of our public school system, because it's not serving our students, because they don't feel safe, because bullying is on the rise, because anxiety and depression is on the increase.
Thank you,
We have
Michelle.
got to make our school system the best it can possibly be so we draw everybody back in.
Thank you.
So I'll start this way. I believe that you have to revere educators, lift them up, be sure that folks understand that this is a noble profession. Then I think you have to do things to be sure that we support them so that they can deliver the educational opportunities to our students. I think that you have to think about how you also hold them accountable for results. And so I lean on my experience certainly as superintendent of Guilford County Schools, where I absolutely revered educators, but at the same time said we have results that we must meet, and if we're not meeting them, then we must do some drastic things. I did a number of complete school turnarounds to try to elevate the educational performance for our students, and we were quite successful in some of those turnarounds. Now, one of the things that it is always challenging to do is to think about some of what, for example, my opponent lifts up, and then match it up with then what she has actually said in other instances. So, for example, with regards to our public schools, she will say that our public schools it's not a place for them to provide free meals to our students.
I've never said that.
Okay.
I've never said that. I have a plan to bring free meals to everybody.
Okay. It's my turn.
Misinformation.
It's
Be
my
careful.
turn. It's my turn to speak. And so, if you'll allow me
Well, it's
the
important to tell
opportunity.
the truth, Mo.
And so, it is my turn to
Could
speak.
we add 30 seconds to the clock, please? Thank you.
Thank you. And so, you can look it up. It's on video.
Awesome.
And so you can get it abundantly clear that she says it's not the place of public schools to provide free meals for students. You can look it up. It's not the place to provide counselors for students. It's not the place to provide health care workers for students. And so when you try to match that up within what is stated this morning,
Thank you, Mo.
it's very challenging to be able to do
Thank
so.
you, Mo.
All right, we just need to set the stage here, ladies and gentlemen. The reason why I got into this and why I have been fighting for your children was all about nurses. Do you know that right now our schools are sharing a school nurse between 5 and 6 schools? Do you know that our administrators are expected to give medications and to give our kids shots? It's not safe. And it's not what we should be doing. And we're putting our administrators and our teachers at risk of severe lawsuits. So when you talk about free lunch and whatnot, I have actually been working. The number one industry
give you
in
10
all
seconds.
of the number you gave him 30. The number one industry in all of North Carolina is farming. Our farmers should be providing the food for our students so they get sound basic nutrition. It really impacts the way that they think, the way that they perform, and their ability in their behavior.
Thank
you got to be careful what you take snippets and bit bites out of 300 and 400 hours worth of video. It's not hard to find something to fit your agenda.
Thank you, Michelle. So, as a classroom teacher, I'm fortunate enough to work with our students every day, and I really love the stories they bring. I love going to their sporting events. I love hearing about what's going on at home. I love hearing about the jobs that they work. Students, for I think a lot of us, are at the center of what we do. I have found that the classes I teach really resonate with those students. Again, I teach AP African American Studies, Honors Latin American Studies, and World History. And so, since the beginning of my teaching career, our state has actively tried to take away these classes. Back in 2021, Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson supported House Bill 324, which would prevent discussions on race and gender in the classroom. We saw this effort rise again in 2023 with House Bill, I want to make sure I get this right, with House Bill 187. It was the same effort. We've also seen that the UNC UNC Board of Educators has also removed DEI efforts across the state. And so I'm wondering for the two of you, and for this one I'm going to hold us to a strict 2 minutes. I was trying to juggle that. I apologize for the discrepancy in the seconds there. My question to you is this, related to the classes I teach and to those bills that have been offered up in our state. What do you think public education, what responsibility do you think public education has in discussing race and gender in the classroom, as well as how do these considerations inform your decision making as a leader?
Does it matter who goes first?
You may go first if you'd like to.
Okay, sure. I truly believe that every person is created equal, and I think the least important part of a person is the things that are unchangeable, your race and your gender. I believe that what's most important is someone's personality, your gifts, your talents, your interests, and your life experience. That's not to say that I don't think that your culture is absolutely important. It is. But I think when we are dividing our children, or when we're telling our children that your value, that your abilities, or that your future is determined by the color of your skin or your gender, we are doing them a disservice, because our children are capable. They are filled with potential. And I think what we need to focus on is bringing that out and finding the things that we have in common as human beings, as Americans. That needs to be the focus. And I would say we absolutely need our children to know the truth. They need to know the truth about history, whether it's world history or US history. And that's the bad, and it's also the good. They need to know that so that they can learn, so that we can move forward in a positive direction. I'm 100% in favor of teaching the truth about biology, the truth about civics, the truth about everything, because our children believe any adult that's put in front of them. So it is really important that we not be dividing them, especially in a time when there are so many young people that come from mixed-raced families. We are creating an anxiety within them that they feel like they have to identify with one side or the other, and that's not who they are as a person. That's not the most important thing. So can you talk about your culture, and should we celebrate differences in culture? Absolutely. I just think that we are putting these ideologies and philosophies in our children when they are not yet old enough to handle that. They are concrete thinkers until about 5th grade, and we need to understand that, and we need to take advantage of that and make sure that they are getting an education so they can have adult conversations and discussions and find ways that we agree rather than dividing us up.
Thank you. Maurice?
And I'm still Mo. Issues around diversity, equity, and inclusion are critically important to be taught and exercised in our schools. We must teach the history of this country, and we must be willing to recognize that race has played a significant part in the history of this country. And there are reasons why, those historical contexts, reasons why then certain things exist as they do today. And as opposed to my opponent, race is one of the most important things about my existence, and I would argue for many others. And to minimize that is to minimize people's existence in this country. And so, I'm not aligned with efforts to do away with important issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion, recognizing that diversity ought to be seen as a strength. Equity ought to be seen as a way to give each child what they need, recognizing that each child is different. And inclusion is this opportunity to be sure that all children are included in our remarkable society and feel safe in it. And you can have these conversations as early as possible in kids' existence.
Thank you. I want to offer us some statistics, and I'll frame the question after I offer us the statistics. According to NC Newsline, during the 2021-2022 school year, nearly 67% of white students passed state exams, meaning they scored at level 3 or better. Meanwhile, only 36.1% of black students and 42.3% of Latinx students were proficient on state exams. Black and Latinx students make up more than 50% of the state's 1.5 million K-12 students. The question that I have for both of you is this: How do we make sense of this discrepancy, and how would you address this in your role of state superintendent?
Well, I think that the discrepancy you can see is because we are not focusing on academics. I don't believe that anybody, regardless of the background that you come from, does not have the ability to learn. So we have got to figure out why our students are not learning and performing, and even more so, why are we celebrating them going from grade to grade when they aren't able to compete? The reality is my opponent wants to sit up here and talk about how great it was when he was the superintendent in Guilford County. All he did was inflate the graduation rates so that everybody would be off their back, and nothing changed in the ability of the students to pass their end of grade tests. The competency of those students did not increase. We are not doing our students any favors by telling them that you are ready for the university system and then they're not ready. It doesn't make any difference. I've talked to university professors. I have a Cornell professor that reached out to me and he said, I know in my classes the students that are coming from North Carolina because they are not ready for college. That is a horrible indictment on our public school system in North Carolina. And so it is not about talking to kids about how they feel about who they are in their body. It's about teaching them to think critically. It's about preparing them to be the next inventors, the next entrepreneurs, the next scientists, the next doctors, and understand if they don't know academics, they're not going to be able to reach those dreams. And so that is what I'm going to focus on. No one should leave 5th grade if they have not mastered reading, writing, and math, period. It's not okay to just say you could go along and you're fine, because we're frustrating the teachers at the higher levels too, because those teachers weren't allowed to give zeros. They weren't allowed to hold them back. We have got to strengthen the parents. We need to give incentives. We need to train the parents on how to help their children. This needs to be a collaboration. You know, I have a child with special needs, and I went through the IEP system. I worked for years with tutoring and all of that, going through the public school system. It is hard, and I was doing that. There's a lot of parents that can't do that because they're both working 2 jobs or because they don't speak English or whatever it might be. We have got to make this be a community where everyone is going to be successful, or none of us are.
Thank you. Mo?
So I certainly believe that we have to raise the level of expectations for all of our students and then provide them with the resources necessary for them to be successful. And so I'll give 2 examples from Guilford County Schools to try to drive this point home. We had a school that had 25% of its kids performing on grade level. We did a complete turnaround of that school, bringing in new leadership and entire staff turnover. That school ultimately was in the 70% range a couple of years later. That school was largely Latinx. Second school that was in the 40% range on end of course exams, went to over 90% on end of course exams, with 100% graduation rate, with 100% of the kids being accepted to a college or university. And that school was all male, and it was almost 100% African American male. And so these are examples of how you can actually do the work, make improvements for all types of students if you focus on setting high expectations, giving the supports necessary, recognizing that sometimes those supports are going to have to be ones that recognize who those children are and the backgrounds that they come from, the cultures that they have, the things that will resonate with them so that then they can perform as we know that they are capable of doing so. So this concept of Guilford County Schools didn't raise the performance of students. We only increased graduation rates. Wow. I've given you 2 examples. I can give you more.
Thank you. So I'd like to now turn over the conversation, and this is deviating a little bit from what I prepped us for earlier. I'm just going to turn it over to the Q&A now,
Okay.
and I'll offer us final remarks at the end.
Okay.
So now it's time to hear from y'all as the audience, to hear what people are interested in asking. The most liked, I guess we could say liked question on here is, what is your position on House Bill 10?
House Bill 10. Define.
So House Bill 10 is, it's been lumped into the private school voucher system.
Okay.
Efforts to fund those private school vouchers. But it's been lumped in, and it would require local sheriff's departments to collaborate with ICE for the sake of detaining people who may have undocumented status.
Okay. I fully believe that we need to make sure that our laws are protected inside of our schools and outside of our schools. I think when we talk about revering teachers, when you look at what the teachers have reported in their own surveys at the end of the year, the #1 reason why teachers are leaving right now is because they do not feel safe in the classroom, they do not feel like they have the backing of administration, and they are not given the time to teach. Rather, they're doing with all the administrative stuff. I think the #1 thing that we can do in terms of our schools is to ensure that our administrators understand their #1 role is to create a culture of collaboration and civility and respect, and a place where the teachers and the students cannot wait to get to in the morning. And I think that we need to have an expectation of, we need to raise that bar of expectation in terms of conduct as well as academic performance. We need to hold our parents accountable to actually getting our students into the schools, and we need to help them to do that in any way possible. Because right now we have almost 500,000 students across the state of North Carolina who miss more than a month of school a year. Teachers are not miracle workers. They cannot teach that student and get them where they need to be if they're not in their seats. So I completely believe that we need to help our families to help their students to reach whatever that potential is. Now, I am in favor 100% of having safety in our schools so that we don't have 1,473 teachers be assaulted on the job, so that we don't have the bullying crisis that we do, so that our students are not frightened to go into a bathroom because it reeks of pot smoke or because they're worried about somebody attacking them in a dark hallway. Because it might not be happening in the school where you work in, ladies and gentlemen, but it's happening in North Carolina. And when you look at Charlotte-Mecklenburg and Guilford County schools, and you look at the crime rates of what's happening there, lower and lower, kids that are younger and younger and doing horrible crime. We have got to help our children to be able to be self-controlled, but also have hope and purpose in the future. And that's what the education system should be doing.
Thank you. Mo?
So I'm going to focus on House Bill 10. So there's the taxpayer-funded private school voucher program that has expanded the number of dollars that will go into this program. I think the bill had about $463 million that will go in. This will turn into billions of dollars over the next 10 years. These are dollars that ought to be in our public schools. I gave you the stats earlier as to where we find ourselves in this state compared to the rest of the country. We have got to have those dollars into our public schools. And so I am opposed to the tax. May I? Please do not interrupt me. Please don't do that.
You don't lie, I won't interrupt.
Character development ought to be taught to everybody. I'll leave that right where it is. Now, let me continue my comment. The wealthiest of the wealthy are being able to take advantage of this, while our children in our public schools absolutely need these dollars. And so I'm opposed to the taxpayer-funded private school voucher program. With regards to the ICE part, I have not had a chance to really look at that legislation. And so I would want to spend more time with it, but understand that that is a deep concern of mine in general, what we do with regards to folks who are, if I understand it, being how does local law enforcement work with ICE in this regard. I think that's something that we need to think about very deeply as to whether we want to be connecting those two, but I need to look at that legislation to understand exactly what it proposes.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm trying to scroll through the questions to make sure I get one that people are wanting. So here's a question about budget allocation for schools. And this person's interested in, if you were elected state superintendent, how would you ensure that the state budget is allocated out across our state in an equitable manner to ensure that all students are receiving the education that they need?
Do you want him to go first, or do I always answer first?
Maurice, you can go first.
All right, I'm still Mo. I believe that we ought to have this as a critically important issue for this office and the State Board of Public Instruction, because we recognize across this state the level of resources is not equitable. We need to be working with our General Assembly to be sure that more dollars are given to locations where those dollars are not there. I mean, I think about our low-wealth school districts as an example. And by the way, Z. Smith Reynolds funds the low-wealth plaintiff school districts in the long-standing Leandro litigation. Just an example of what ZSR is up to. This is critically important for us to be sure that those schools and school districts get those resources for those children. and it needs to be done in an equitable manner. It would be wonderful to simply say, well, everybody gets what everyone else gets, but we need to recognize that in some locations, they don't have the same sort of access to opportunities. They need to be provided more resources. And so part of what I would be doing is actually trying to be sure that we differentiate the level of resources given across our entire state. Please understand that that again is what we did in Guilford County Schools. As we looked at where there were schools that needed more resources, we actually created an own region of 9 schools and said, we're going to pour even more resources into these 9 schools to try to elevate the educational opportunities in those 9 schools, recognizing that then that meant less resources for our other schools. But we thought that was so important to do that we made it happen in those 9 schools.
Thank you.
Understand that we have got to prioritize every dollar that we spend on student success first and foremost. There is an inverse relationship between the amount of money that we have been spending over the last 20 years and the literacy rates here in North Carolina. Do you know we are spending more than ever before, and we have lower competency in math and reading across all demographics of students? There is a graph out there from 2003 to 2023. Do I believe absolutely that every student in 2024, there is no excuse why any student should not be getting the opportunity and the education they need, regardless of what zip code you live in. But it's about us prioritizing how we're spending. That money needs to start with student needs, with classroom resources, and with boots on the ground. We have got to limit the number of bureaucratic people that are getting so much, they're getting wealthy off of the failure of our school system. Ladies and gentlemen, there is a reason why people are leaving the public school system. It's because it is not giving their children the opportunities and the education that they need. It is not just wealthy people that are wanting to leave the school system. So when you're talking about opportunity scholarships, when you're talking about this fight for some reason between charters and traditional public schools, you have to ask yourself the question, who is the focus in this regard? In 37 of our 115 districts, there is no charter option. So if you have a student that is being bullied, that is not getting the education they need, they're not getting the resources, they have special needs that they're not getting, why would we keep them from going into a private education system? But here's the thing, this is a short-term response until we can make our public schools the absolute best place for every family, so we can draw them back in, so we can ensure that we are recruiting and retaining our excellent teachers. I am 100% in favor. If we have an area that is a poorer area, if we need 2 teachers in that kindergarten, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd grade class to make sure that our kids are getting what they need, then let's fund it. If we need to pay people more to go out to an area, then we need to pay those teachers more in a poor area where there's not as much infrastructure, where you don't have the opportunity for a spouse to have another education. I'll say this too, there is no reason why any teacher should ever have to be paying for resources in their classroom or get a second job. Thank you. Ever.
So I want to be mindful of the time. I appreciate the audience for submitting all your questions. I apologize that I was not able to get to a significant number of them. In a second here, I'll give each candidate the opportunity to offer some closing remarks, and then I'll offer my final remarks. Latine voters are a diverse group and not a monolith. Historically, we haven't always been taken seriously as voters. People haven't always taken the time to show up in person for us. And so I appreciate both of you for making the time to actually come out and engage in a conversation in front of us today. Because we are running low on time, I want to offer us each 1 minute apiece, and then I'll offer us some closing remarks on my end. So Maurice, I'll start with you. Excuse me, Mo, I'll start with you. What final message would you like to share with Latine voters who are still undecided about your candidacy?
What I'll share is there is a stark difference between the two of us. There's one who has walked the walk, and there's one who's talked the talk. I have the experience of having led one of the largest school districts in our state. and have it make notable improvements in academics, graduation rates, and character development, as opposed to someone who homeschools their children. This is the Chief Administrative Officer position for public schools. It's a large, enormous job. You might want to have somebody who has had the experience. Number two, belief in our public schools. My wife and I, we were blessed. We were blessed with 2 children. We were blessed to be able to choose where to send our children. We chose to put them into our public schools. And then third, character. Character. You saw it exhibited today.
Thank you. I will say this. He does have a lot of experience in failure, a lot of experience in supporting a system rather than the students. I am focused on being the voice and the advocate for the families of North Carolina. I have heard over the last 5 and 6 years what the parents want. They want their children to be safe. They want them to get a good education. They want them to be able to do even greater things than they have done. And if we do not focus on academics, if we do not focus on, as he stated, character development, rather than dividing ourselves up, we need to focus on the fact of what are your skills, your talents, your gifts, and your talents. And I will tell you what is my experience. Then in the last 7 years, I have been devoting my time to try to help the public school system. I have been speaking at school board meetings. I've been speaking with the General Assembly members. I have been focusing on getting us back on track so that every student has an opportunity to reach their fullest potential. He is promoting the system. Understand, when you ask for more money, that money's coming out of your pocket. We must be responsible with the amount of money that right now we are paying in taxes, because 50% of all of our state money goes to the public school system. And we have over 50% of our students across the board that cannot read or do math at grade level. That will change when I'm the superintendent.
Thank you. So in a quick second here, we're going to let the candidates, they have other appointments. Thank you again for both being here. Thank you for your candidness and your responses today. To our audience, we were privileged to hear a great conversation today between our 2 candidates. Many of you may know someone in your community who's not registered to vote. Please take the effort to register people to vote if they're able to do so. Some of y'all may know of someone who is skeptical of the voting system. Please encourage them to vote. Please encourage them to know that their vote matters. Take the effort to inform the people around you. This conversation today has been recorded, and I encourage each of you to share it with the people in your community who might not know about this important election. And lastly, please yourself go and vote. Thank you.